So I'm sure you guys remember this concept shot I showed you way back at the start of the series. Well, the game's not going to look like this, because quite frankly, this looks a little, kinda amateur. Like, not really amateur, but it's like, it just has that feel about it that it could be better. So what we're going to be doing today is coming up with a better concept shot. And as you can see, I'm using an old program here called Deluxe Paint 2 Enhanced. This is an old DOS program that I still use because it is so powerful for what it can do. Now, we're ultimately going to turn this into a high-def version. So with that in mind, I want to make sure that I'm working within a sort of frame that expands to 1080p more easily. Now, at first I tried figuring out some of the interface and everything as I was going, but this usually doesn't work out for me. So I ultimately realized I needed to take a more thoughtful approach to this. So given the fact that there's going to be a UI on the screen at all times to show just basic status for the player and everything, I needed to figure out, what do I actually need to show on the screen? Ultimately, I figured out I needed to show 7 stats on the screen. I needed to show the player's shield levels, their weapons, the number of lives they had left, their score, and along with their multiplier, their power-ups, the missiles they have, and the level they're on, possibly with some extra details to go with that. So with this in mind, I first tried to figure out, where should I show all of this information? Like, can I show it at the bottom of the screen? Can I show it at the top? Can I show it at the sides? And given the fact that we're working with a widescreen and we're trying to do a single screen game here, I actually went back to my original idea of having the status bar on the left side of the screen and just have all the stats on that side and just have all of the right side for the actual gameplay. Now, the other thing I had to consider as I was putting up this mock-up here is that everything that we put together here, we're going for that sort of glowing approach. So I need to be certain that what I'm doing is going to actually look good once a glow effect is applied. Now, that might seem pretty trivial when it comes down to it, but it means there's a few things to keep in mind there. It means, first of all, there's not going to be as much definition between thin lines. So you need to make sure that stuff that needs to be discernible is sort of separated to some degree. Like, I mean, with the sort of the text and the numbers here, I was more so just trying to get the sizing right and everything. The positioning does still work out pretty well with the glow effect applied, but it was something to consider all the same. The other thing to consider too is that you really have to go for high contrast visuals. Like, if you wanted to like sort of give like 2 different sort of tones of a color right next to each other, they're probably going to blend into each other to some degree. And this is something you're going to see when you see the fully finished conceptual screenshot with the glow effect applied. So it's something I'll address later on. Now, coming up with the score effect was pretty simple. Just had a big font for it and made it narrow so that I could fit like 1 billion points in there easily. But coming up with the shields was a little trickier, because I needed something that would look decent, yet it also needed to be able to convey 2 different kinds of shields, because it needs to be able to do both the charged shields and the regenerative shields. So I ultimately decided on a diamond design, which will eventually take the shape of the shield power-ups, as well as having a symbol on the diamond to indicate how charged the shields are. Now, this is going to be something of an issue when the glow effect is applied. Again, you'll see when we actually get to that part. Now, I know the weapons don't look really sort of aligned perfectly in this shot right here. Something to keep in mind is that because we're going from a resolution of 480 by 270 to 1920 by 1080, that's a 4x increase. And when you increase the resolution by an even factor, you can actually recenter 1 pixel differences like that. So those weapons will actually be centered, like the sprites for it will be centered in the fully completed HD version of this. Right here though, they're going to be off by a pixel. Now, I absolutely wanted the missiles to show up as like individual missiles because I thought that would look really nice. But the other thing I had to consider is, what if the player has a whole crap ton of missiles? Like, I need to be able to showcase that. So what the game will actually do is it'll show up to 20 missiles just on their own. In fact, it'll actually technically show up to 40 missiles just on their own. But if the player has over 40 missiles, it'll start to compact sets of 20 into little packages that only take up the same space as 4 missiles. This makes it possible for the player to technically have 120 missiles, given the amount of space taken up by the 20 packs and by the individual missiles. Now, one thought I came up with as I was developing this screenshot here is, instead of having them called levels, I should call them missions, and then actually have it so that the mission section of this status bar here will actually show what kind of enemies are left to face. Now, it's not going to show bosses because bosses are only going to be once every 10 levels, and it's going to be on screen the whole time, so you don't really need to count that as its own thing. But in this case, I wanted to make sure I showed the number of regular enemies, tough enemies, and large enemies that were going to be left in the mission. Now, at this point, I actually realized something. I didn't really have a good place to put the lives. So it occurred to me that maybe I should just put them right underneath the score counter. So that's what I did. I took a copy of the score counter here and made some room to put a lives indicator in. Just put them in as like little ship icons. And then I just sort of moved everything back into a decent position. For the power-ups, I wanted to make them similar to weapons, but distinct in their own way. Now, I hadn't really come up with the weapon design yet. It's probably going to be in a square type shape, but for the power-ups, I wanted them to be just sort of a flat shaded thing with some effects and a symbol in the center. It kind of doesn't work out, again, for the same reasons as the shields, with their diamonds and there's sort of 3 in the middle there, as you can see. It's something that'll show up when you see the fully completed conceptual screenshot. Once I had this all figured out, the next challenge was making sure it actually, fit in a decent way. I recognized I still had some space left, so I needed to either fill that space or shift everything. And I thought about what I could fill the space with, but I couldn't really come up with anything decent, so I ultimately just shifted everything. I also took a moment to reorganize the power-ups in the mission, because I felt mission worked better at the bottom than the power-ups. And then I just started mocking up some enemy ships. I don't know if these will actually be used in the finished design, but they might be. And I had them in some patterns, made a couple different ones, including some regular enemies and some tough enemies. I put some shots on there, and then added some stars. And that concludes for the low-res conceptual screenshot here. So this gives me an idea of how I want this game to look. And I actually spent some time afterwards producing a high-definition version of this, and then also tried applying the glow effect that Godot provides to this image to see how it would look. So as you can see, going from the full screen at the low resolution, and then going up to high def, everything looks a lot more defined now. And next episode I'll actually go into how I made the changes to go from the low resolution version to the high def version. But adding the glow effect here, you can actually sort of see that some things do get washed out a little. So that's something I need to address with the design here. But overall, it works out pretty well. So this is what we're going to be aiming for the game to sort of look like. And we're going to be doing more conceptual screenshots as we go forwards to address things like user interface aspects or just in general, different parts of the program. And we're actually going to be using a lot of what we create in these conceptual screenshots as the actual assets. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes together.